Yes, President Galbraith, members of the board, Dr. Cleveland, this is Tana Burgos, the Executive Director of Student Services. And Shelley Havel is also here, our director that oversees these two programs on a daily basis, but it is under the Student Services Department, so she'll be able to answer questions as well if there are any. But I think most people know that the Enchanted Mesa Daycare and the SAFE program is 100% self-sustaining. So we rely on parent payments as well as staff payments for the daycare to pay all of our salaries for our hourlies and our coordinators, which is 85 employees. And I think everyone also knows for the governor and the situation that we're in, that everybody would stay in their positions and still be paid. And so in these two programs, we don't have any funding coming in because they're not running and they're not conducting themselves. So therefore, it was decided as a district that we would pay these positions. And so a lot of the information is in this 3-page document that we put together for you. And we are open to any questions that you have, as well as Shelley is here too.
Okay, we will start with Board Member Coleman.
Board Member Coleman, I was curious now with where we're taking the funds from to pay for this, and how much we are now spending to assist some of our first responders. And I saw that it has kind of decreased, but I'm just kind of curious how this is projected moving forward. And then in turn, my question is without getting the funding, where are the funds coming from?
So I would think that finance would answer the question about the funding, and then Shelley can speak to our continued efforts for first responders. As it has tapered off, we still are doing that.
Okay, ready? There you go, Baker, you're on.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Dr. Cleveland, school board members. So the funds will be coming from operational, and they will be coming from essentially vacancy savings. So that's where the funding will be coming in order to provide for the payment of those two groups of employees.
Thank you. Let's see, Board Member Cullen.
I'm not, if I may.
Oh, I'm sorry, Board Member Coleman, go ahead.
Sure. So again, this is Board Member Coleman. I'm curious, with it coming from operational and vacancy savings, and how have we looked at this as a district with potential cuts that are coming? What is the plan for this and for these expenses?
Madam Chair, so next year, we're anticipating that we won't be shut down going into next year. Next year, EMDC and SAFE will be increasing their rates, and their operational expenses and their revenue will take care of their operational expenses.
I would just add one thing to that. We are expecting some revenue to come back from the public ed department to help with some of these expenditures, but we don't know exactly how much it's going to be. Again, this is Sue Cleveland, I'm sorry. Superintendent, we do expect some money to be coming back through the CARES Act to help with some of these expenditures. And Mike, I don't know if you or Arlene know more about that now, but we are expecting some revenue to come that will cover some of these expenses.
We haven't heard any about the
But we're going to put in for it, right? Mm-hmm. So we are tracking all of our expenses due to COVID-19. We will be submitting reimbursement, and it will be up to the state/federal government in order to go through those reimbursement forms, and either they will accept or deny. Oh, sorry, Mike Baker, COO.
Thanks, Mike. Board Member Coleman, any more questions?
Yes, again, this is Board Member Coleman. I just wanted to see if Michelle Havel could go ahead and just give an update on kind of how it's projected to handle taking care of offering childcare for first responders and kind of that outlook.
So I can address the first responder care. The first 2 weeks of the closure prior to spring break, of course, when that was our initial closure period, we did have 4 staff in place at the daycare and an additional 6 staff in place at Ernest Stapleton for school-age students. Of course, spring break came along and we had a lot of folks who had already arranged care. So we did decrease staff at that point and divert all care to Enchanted Mesa Daycare, one, to consolidate the number of staff we were using, and then also to limit exposure to just the one site so that we didn't have folks in and out at 2 different locations. We did find that primarily we had 32 students registered, 24 families, so of course siblings, and they were primarily from Rest Medical and Sandoval Region Medical Center. And what we did find is once the school year was closed for the remainder of the academic year, that we did see a decrease in students, especially as parents or spouses that were not first responders started to see that they were under work at home orders as well. So right now we are working to have anywhere from 2 to 3 staff members a day, depending on ratio. We do have 2 staff members each day for 9 hours. We have an assistant coordinator who is available because she's able to do things like the alarm, the gates, things of that nature. And then we have 1, at times 2, depending on if there's infants present. So no more than 3 staff at a time. And it works out to about 2.5 staff members being paid for the 40-hour week.
Thank you. Board Member
Thank
Coleman?
you.
Any further questions? Okay. Moving on then to Board Member Cullen.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for putting this together, since when I saw this coming across as the bars for about a projection of 419,961, I guess my first instinct was because CYF and the ECECD had expanded for childcare for first responders and health providers. So that was my question, is if we were going to try to get reimbursement from the state. And so thank you for answering that question. That was primarily what I was looking at when we had that board meeting. So thank you.
Board Chairman Galbraith?
My questions have been satisfied now, so thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Jeffrey Morgan?
No questions, thank you.
I have no questions. Dr. Cleveland, do you have any additions?
Just a question. Do we still have any of our staff members, children in these daycare situations?
We did, sorry, this is Michelle Havel speaking, I forgot. Yes, we did have, for the first 3 weeks of the closure, we had a number of Sodexo employee children because of course they were doing the meal preparation. We had a number of custodians who registered for care, and then we had a handful of district office level staff who had registered, but once work from home for the remainder of the year took place, those staff did opt to keep children home. So we've had a few from Sodexo, but for the most part, it's been primarily Rest and Sandoval Regional.
Thank you very much.
If there are no further discussion on this, we'll move on to Mike Baker's presentation on what we're all waiting to hear, the 2021 budget.
Madam Chair, Dr. Cleveland, school board members, hope you can hear me all okay?
Yes.
So, as you can imagine, this year, like most years, has been particularly challenged because of the economic situation that we're in right now. And during the legislative session, the legislature allocated their resources, and then TED allocated their resources to each district. So because of that, and knowing that the state is experiencing an economic downturn, which will affect the state budget, in essence, will affect our budget, we are still required to submit a balanced budget according to the 2020 legislative session. The unfortunate thing about this budget is we put the budget together. It is according to the requirements of the 2020 legislative session, but we also realize that this particular budget will never see the light of day because as the legislature meets in special session and as the cuts occur, we will have to adjust and amend our budget for the 2021 school year. So what we are presenting is a balanced budget according to the 2020 legislative session. Please keep in mind that this will change for sure. It will change depending on how the state changes its funding. So with that, Jane, if you can bring up the summary sheet, please.
CFO Baker, do we have any sense of when this is Maureen Scott, board member, do you have a sense of when the special session will be held?
I can answer that. As of this morning, I can. I was on a call this morning. I'm one of a group of superintendents that has been asked to work with the secretary on the budget. And we met for 2 hours this morning. This is what Secretary Stewart shared with us this morning. The governor is not going to call a session until she pretty much has an agreement with both parties about the things that she thinks are most important. And so that's not going to happen right away. Probably the earliest date will be July, and it could be even as late as August or even September, but probably not. It's what he's hearing and thinking as of right now. But he says that can change. The thing that is interesting, which I think we all know, is that he basically said all the decisions will be made before the special session. So the special session will be a formality and everything will be voted on. So the work to get the budget pulled together is going on now. And all the negotiations for what goes in that budget and what comes out is happening now. And so by the special session, we'll know what those decisions are. But it's not going to happen right away. And then the last thing that was shared is that the governor is really wanting to wait probably 2 months to see what happens with oil and gas and to see if there's any turnaround at all in the situation for futures for a barrel of oil. So I'm sorry, Mike, to jump in there, but I just got that information this morning. We were on from 10 till 12:30, and that's the latest coming from the Secretary of Education.
Thank you, Dr. Cleveland. CFO Baker, we'll take it back to you now.
Okay, Madam Chair. So we have the operational budget summary. And so at the top of the form, over to the left, you will see what our total SEG is for next school year, which is just under $154 million. Other sources of revenue is approximately 1.5, and our estimated cash carry is about $18.5 million for a total revenue of approximately $174 million. Arlene will be going over more detail on the 910B5 form and our other revenue to demonstrate where those funds are specifically coming from. On the right side, you'll see total expenditures. Total salary, approximately $95 million. Total benefits, about $34.5 million. And then department and school budgets is approximately $44 million for a total expenditure of approximately 174 million. You'd see the difference between revenue and expenditures is 0. So we are presenting a balanced budget, which is required by law. Now, the next question typically we get is, what are the changes between last school year and the upcoming school year? And so the next area in gray that's highlighted are those changes. The first one, which is the big one, which is required by PED for us to submit, is the 4% salary adjustment, which is approximately 4.7 million. The other thing that we have been planning for quite some time is the opening of Joe Harris Elementary, which has an impact of approximately 1.4 million. The Student Support Center, approximately 600,000. Career Technical Education, or CTE, approximately 116,000. Additional personnel in the budget in order for that our student ratio and teacher ratio is what it is required by laws, approximately 1.1 million. We do have a fairly significant increase in medical benefits or costs, which is approximately 700,000. Workers' compensation, approximately 110,000. And we had our software funding, which was in SB9 that we moved into operational, is approximately 500,000. The total is approximately a bit over $9 million, which is the addition SEG that we received this year. In addition to that, we are estimating that our transportation shortfall, if the legislature and PED did not address our concerns, will be $1 million. That being said, we should have our transportation numbers at the end of the month. I was at a meeting in regard to transportation several months ago. We were assured at that time that they would address these deficits. But to be honest with you, the proof will be in the pudding. And so we will see those numbers hopefully at the end of the month. And so that is a summary of the 2021 fiscal year budget. And we will go into more detail. So Arlene will go into the more detail in regard to revenue. Mike Chavez, Renee, and Jana will go into the allocations or the additional allocations that we have in the budget. Heather will go over the salaries and benefits, which is by far the most significant cost factor in our budget. And then I will wrap it up by giving a summary of department expenses. And then when we meet again in May, I will go into the detail in regard to department expenses. We will also at that time begin showing you our essentially game plan when our budget is cut and how we plan on addressing those particular cuts. So, are there any questions?
We'll start with Board Member Cullen. Board Member
I'm sorry,
Cullen.
did you say Board Member Cullen or Coleman?
Cullen. Board Member Cullen. Catherine, do you have any questions?
I think we're both still confused. You were cutting out. So I'll just say I don't have any questions at this point. Thank you. This is Board Member Cullen.
Board Member Coleman.
No, I don't at this point.
Board Chair Albreth.
I don't have any questions at this point.
Finance Vice Chair Morgan.
No questions at this time.
And I have no questions. Dr. Cleveland, do you have anything to add? Dr. Cleveland, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I forgot to unmute myself. Yeah, the only point is a comment that looking at any enhancements to the budget are pretty problematic at this point. Additional allocations or whatever, certainly very soon the focus is going to go the other direction in terms of what will be reduced out of the budget. Just a couple of other just quick things. There is an increase being passed on in terms of insurance. This morning that was discussed. The unions are pushing very hard to at least get the increase in the health insurance covered so that people don't see a drop in their pay. There was discussion about whether the same thing would apply that's happening in the automotive industry. All of the elective surgeries that are not being done, would there be savings there that could be passed on, and maybe we wouldn't need that increase passed on to the districts and the individuals. But I can't imagine with the cost of COVID-19 that won't more than offset the savings in terms of the elective surgeries. I think one we'll talk with you more about, but everyone should be thinking about is Joe Harris, the opening of Joe Harris and what we're going to do with that. And then my last comment is this morning when we were on, I did very nicely remind the Secretary, Mike, of that comment about paying our transportation. And, given the state of the budget next year, I did say to the Secretary that if it's not fully funded, I have absolutely no idea how we would do it all year. We would probably be forced to stop transportation at some point. And so I did bring that issue back up and reminded them of that commitment that they would pay for our transportation. That should be paid as one of the fixed costs. As they're looking at building a budget, they're starting with a fixed cost and then building out. And so, transportation continues to be such a big issue for Rio Rancho. So I just thought I would pass that on.
I'm not clear on the question about Joe Harris. Is there an option for us not to open it?
There is always an option. It would be a very difficult thing not to open it. But I think what's important for the board to know is there will be additional costs incurred when we do. I think that we will have to have additional staff, and we will also incur some additional fixed costs. There would also be, though, on the other side, huge challenges to keep a school that taxpayers have built empty for a year. And what's even more troubling is that the next year following this coming year, 21-22, is projected to be even more lean unless things dramatically change. And so it would probably be 2 years out before we were able to open if we didn't open now. So, our hope is that we can find a way to open Joe Harris. This community has waited 10 years for this. I think there's going to be huge disappointment. But there are going to be additional expenses. Now, when you look at Shining Stars, that's a little different. There would be a few additional expenses, but we expect to actually save maybe some revenue in a much more energy efficient building. And you're closing one facility, opening another. And so that cost, I believe, is negligible. At least that's what I've heard from Mike and Melanie. But definitely we open Joe Harris, there's going to be a lot of costs involved with that. And the board just needs to be aware of that. Related to that, and I shared that with you in the last conversation we had, have approached the state for the money that we have in reserves, that we find a way to protect that money so that we in fact can open Joe Harris and that it be allocated for that purpose. That's what it's been saved for. And the response that I've gotten back was very positive. Some of our legislators have now followed up and also spoken with the state, and they are kind of getting the same response, that the state sees that as an extenuating circumstance. And I think everyone is very concerned about leaving a building empty. And then my last comment on that would be that the other option that goes along with that is for us to grow the enrollment there. And so, if we can grow the enrollment and grow the revenue, that would help offset some of that cost. So we're beginning to think about how we might look at actually growing the revenue, which would mean growing some additional students at that site. And again, those can't be students from within Rio Rancho because you move them from one building to another, there's no savings. So we would have to look at perhaps opening it up to some out-of-district enrollment that would actually generate us money. But of course, we would come back and bring that to the board for discussion.
This is Finance Committee, Scott. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Cleveland. Mike, do you want to head off on the next item, allocation?
Yes, Madam Chair, I will turn it over to the Executive Director of Finance, Arlene Manzanares, and she will review the detail on the revenue, specifically the SEG and the 910B5.
Excuse me, before we go, I think we have a couple of hands raised. Board Member Cullen and Board Member Coleman.
I apologize, I didn't see that. Thank you.
This is Board Member Cullen, and if that's okay,
Yes.
Gerald and Scott. So I just wanted to piggyback on what Dr. Cleveland was saying, because we had a real good conversation this week as soon as I saw the oil dropping as significantly it was the other day. And so I think we're not only terms as a board to keep this, kind of out there, not only Joe Harris Elementary School, if it's viable to open next year, but as well as the Student Support Center. We're going to have to be looking at some of the, we're probably going to have to make some tough decisions because there's some significant between the federal impact aid, what's going on with the oil and gas, and once they come back from session. So it's going to be very tough. Some tough decisions are probably going to have to be made once. I mean, this budget that we're going to be sending up there is not going to be the budget at all in reality for next year. So I just kind of wanted to piggyback on what Dr. Cleveland had mentioned a few minutes ago.
Thank you, Board Member Cullen. Board Member Coleman.
Thank you. This is Board Member Coleman. I did just, the other question that I did have is about the student services. And I don't know if there's anything that can be said at this point about that. And if you could address that first, and then I have just one or two more questions.
I'm sorry, Board Member Coleman, you cut out for a moment. Could you restate your question? We lost some of that.
Sure. What I was hoping that you would also address is what's been discussed for the Student Services Center.
Well, I think that just two things quickly. The part of the discussion that is going on, and they talked with us a little bit about this morning, is that, as Board Member Cullen said, one of the big hits to the budget is impact aid. And they shared this morning that's probably a $100 million cut to the state budget. That's going to have to be filled in. And then the other was at risk. And so because of the lawsuit, because of some other things, such as the fact that in this pandemic, the at-risk, the deficiencies and differences among districts has become even more glaringly apparent, that there will probably be no adjustment to the units, that the value of the unit might change, but the indices for at-risk won't change. So let me say that differently. They won't cut how much the expectation for at-risk. The percentage of the budget that goes for at-risk would stay the same. The dollars might go down, but they won't cut at-risk to do something else. So we still will have a lot of responsibilities for at-risk kids, but whether we could at this point manage the Student Support Center everything is certainly something that will have to be discussed, but that would be very challenging to accomplish right now. So it's one of the things that we will have to look at as we build that second budget, the real budget, that once we know the exact amount that is being reduced. One other quick thing, and I'm sure you all know it, but I just want to be sure. And the secretary really emphasized this morning. He said the governor is trying very hard to protect education. She's, been very supportive of a lot of the changes. And there will be cuts to education. I mean, they cannot avoid it, and it will happen. But when you hear, for example, and they just use this as a number, so it's not necessarily the number that will be used, but there might be a 25% cut to the state budget. He cautioned us to say that will not necessarily be a 25% cut to education. It might be a 20 or a 15%, or nobody knows right now. But not to always assume when they talk about an overall cut to the state budget, that is reflective of the education budget necessarily. So they reaffirmed their commitment to the at-risk. They also, though, really reconfirmed that the greatest need right now in the state in every single respect, in terms of the COVID-19, in terms of medical, in terms of food, in terms of everything, are San Juan, McKinley, and Sandoval. And those are related pretty much to the spread of COVID in the Native American communities. And I could have the number a little bit wrong, so give me a little flexibility. But they said like the average person who gets COVID will infect maybe 1.4 other person generally. And in our Native communities, one person is infecting over 3. Way above the norms nationally. So, what they were telling us out of that is, number one, they'll get some help through the impact aid if that stands. And they haven't decided whether they're going to appeal that yet, though there are some districts getting ready to appeal it. And, but they know that they're going to have to redirect some resources to those highest need areas. Because as they said this morning, those are the highest need areas right now. It doesn't necessarily take a lot to figure out that, unless they can get control of it there, it's going to spread to other counties. And of course, we're already seeing it in Sandoval County. It's already beginning to impact all of the county, not just the Native American areas. So there's just so much we don't know. There's so many variables. It's really hard to wrap your head around all of it. But at-risk commitment stays. Dollars may be less. The percentage of the budget will stay the same. And that will still continue to be a key focus of the governor and the secretary.
Board member, this is Renee Saucedo, Secondary School Improvement. Board member Coleman, I don't know if this might help with your question also. We will still continue the student support, AES and reframe, and in the lower level of Rio Rancho Middle School. And so it's not serving the numbers of students that we hope to once we get it over in the new building, but we will still have that program that as it is now. So
Okay.
we will still be serving those students, and hopefully we'll be able to expand into the other building. I don't know if maybe that helps also.
This is Chair Scott. Thank you, Renee.
And this is Board Member Coleman. Thank you, Renee, for providing that information. I would ask that when we start to look at the student services or building and Joe Harris, if we could get kind of that comparison of opening it, and probably more Joe Harris opening it versus not opening, and the expenses, because I do agree that there are expenses to not opening a building also. So I would really would like to see kind of that comparison. And then the last thing that I wanted to say was that Dr. Cleveland, can you speak to, I know back in 2017, as the district went through looking at budget cuts and things like that, that there were some challenges with sweeps. And I don't know if this is the appropriate place to have this discussion, but what are we doing to make sure that we are keeping everything in check, to make sure that we don't put ourselves in that unfortunate situation again with all of this going on?
Okay, Mike may want to respond to this as well. Mr. Baker, I don't know if you do, but I think we're putting the halt right now on almost all. We're going back to what we did then. We're looking at every expenditure now. Every single one will have to be looked at and evaluated. We will be looking at one of the things we shared this morning with the secretary was all the progress that we've made in getting our class sizes down may go away again in order to deal with this. So we'll be looking at whether we rehire people who leave or whether we'll rehire, or people who resign. I think we will keep a very tight control over personnel because that's where most of our money is by far in our budget. And we'll be looking at all of our expenditures very carefully. The other thing is, at the state level, we will be meeting with the secretary again in just a few days. And one of the things that he wants us to come back with are the things that are most important and what we can give up. And I haven't even had a chance to share this with staff yet, but he made no commitments, and obviously he has to go back to the governor. But of the folks that were on this morning of the team he's pulled together, there's strong support to eliminate all summer programs in order to save the money for next fall. The comment that was made this morning is that it is quite possible that this will rival the Great Recession in terms of the amount of cuts that are coming. And so, you do all the things that we did before. You start, watching every single penny and trying to keep as much money back as you can possibly keep back. Thankfully, we do have quite a bit that's been put back. But as I said earlier, much of that is earmarked to open Joe Harris. So I think personnel, certainly we've seen a big reduction already in supplies and materials. All of those things, everything that we can look at from this point on will be from a conservation standpoint. And I don't think we have even within the realm of any possibility of thinking of anything very new. There was some discussion this morning of eliminating all instructional material purchases. Again, there was no commitment to that. There was a discussion about that, and that money be redirected back into the budget. So, but there are things that might be more expensive. For example, there are the number of people that are interested in either going to homeschool or, in the absence of that, they're hoping for a digital platform opportunity. I think if we don't offer, for example, a full digital opportunity, some of the students will not return in the fall, and loss of membership would also result in a loss of revenue. And so there's a lot of things we have to look at. But the whole focus now will be on conserving resources in every single area that we can to keep the fund balance. And then last comment is, you want to keep your fund balance, but you also don't want to have so much of it that they'll come and sweep it again. And we were told this morning that as of right now, it could change. As of right now, sweeps are not on the table for the governor as of now. So that was really good news. And he said, I think that the state government learned a lot from the devastation of that last time. What's more likely to happen is the possibility of legislation even during the special session, if the governor would agree to that, to set a fund balance limit for each school district. And then anything above that might be subject But as I said, we are already way ahead of that in terms of getting the money for Joe Harris set aside. That being said, if we set that money aside for Joe Harris and we don't open Joe Harris, then that money might be subject to sweeps if they were to go back to that. But he did tell us that as of this morning, that's not on the radar. And if it becomes a point on the radar again, superintendents will be informed. My last comment on that, many of you know Senator Kernan from Hobbs. She is the one who is really pushing getting those limits identified and seeing if we can't get something in statute that would protect school districts. And I think that would be a great idea. And then anything you had above that would be subject to state approval. And you could still have it if it was for something like opening a new school and something that was had an academic purpose and would improve the instructional opportunities for school district. Did I answer your question?
This is Board Member Coleman. Yes, and actually it generated two other questions, if I may, Dr. Cleveland. How does the state count what would we need to provide if homeschooling wise in order to get to be able to count a student in our district? Are there specific guidelines that would need to be followed for online?
Yes, there are, and it's and we were told it won't look anything like what we're doing now. So if you go with online, it would look more like cyber, Rio Rancho Cyber. It would have to be a full academic program, and hopefully it would be something like cyber in terms of a blended model where we would have teachers who would be supporting students rather than just sticking students in front of a computer and walking away, which doesn't work very well. But one of the possibilities would be simply expanding Ingenuity. We have a long time experience with that program. That program produces extremely good academic results for our district. And so that would be the possibility. And we're just looking into that. Carl's been looking into that of whether we could offer some families who might prefer Ingenuity, but we certainly do better to keep them in our district for membership. But more importantly, hopefully when this passes, we want those kids coming back and we don't want them a year or two behind. So having a really good, strong program is a requirement, and the state would have to approve that program. For us, that's a moot point because it's already approved Ingenuity, and we have excellent results to show that it works well for our students.
Thank you. There was just one other thought, and I know that there's just been discussion, is that just based on location for Joe Harris, I think that there might be opportunities, I would guess, for even opening up that school to people outside of the district. For example, I think about the location and I think about the hospital and I think about staff members there.
Mm-hmm. We've talked about that, and actually Beth has already reached out to Angela Ward at Russ to see if she thinks there might be any interest. The biggest challenge is getting in that hospital right now. You can't get in there, so you can't talk to anybody. But I do believe, you make a really good point. I do believe that there are lots of staff there that might love to have their children just down the street from them. And especially as this whole health emergency continues on, it might be very attractive to put their children in Joe Harris. And I think there will probably be some from Westside Albuquerque right next door that they too might be interested in putting their children in. We never had a real difficult time in getting people to come into Rio Rancho schools. Our problem has usually been the opposite, telling people they can't come. So I do think there's a real opportunity to grow enrollment. The biggest drawback right now, though, will be we can't provide transportation outside of Rio Rancho. So we could provide it, I guess, to Rust, but we certainly couldn't provide it to Albuquerque. And so they will have to bring their children, and that's always a bit of a challenge. But I think the idea of Rust might be a very good one.
This is Board Member Scott. It is my personal opinion that we should open Joe Harris and that we should not deviate from our plan, if at all possible, because to me, the downside is the potential of losing momentum in the whole school district. And that to me is a challenge.
I do think there's one other, and I mentioned it earlier, but I think there's also a real challenge of keeping a beautiful empty building from being vandalized.
Mm-hmm.
How in the world would we protect that building? And so the other piece is insuring through the state insurance pool. Insuring an empty building is going to be frightfully expensive. It's just like when you insure an empty house. You know, if you're not renting it or it's just sitting vacant, you pay a whole lot more to insure it. And so that would be the same, I suspect, for a school. And to your point that, you know, it's the economic development of that area there is very dependent too. I mean, you know, they're hoping that school will sell that whole area, and I think it will. That whole area would not be helped. And then, of course, the city's pushed very hard to try to get the infrastructure and everything there. It's been very difficult for them. And then to not open it would be very hard. You know, they direct a lot of resources to that side. So, you know, there's just so many factors in not opening the building. And then the last is the least tangible, but one of the most powerful is how this community felt about Joe Harris and waited 10 years to have the school open. That'll be a hard thing for a lot of people in our community to accept.
Yeah, agreed. Are there any further questions from any other board member before we move on with the rest of CFO Baker's team's presentations?
Madam Secretary.
Yes, sir.
Just to completely answer one of the questions that was previously asked, on that summary sheet, under budget additions, you'll see the cost of Joe Harris Elementary School for salary and benefits at approximately $1.4 million. And the same thing with the Student Support Center at approximately $600,000. So if it is decided at a later time, but not that I'm advocating this, that those two programs would not continue, that would be the quote unquote savings. However, that being said, because we do have a new building, there would be costs associated with that new building, such as utility costs, as Dr. Cleveland indicated, insurance costs, and the like. So we would still have to pay for the building. The only thing that we could actually save on would be the salary and benefits. And if there is increased enrollment because of Joe Harris Elementary, those savings potentially could be negligible.
Thank you. I think we're ready to move on. This is Secretary Scott. I'm sorry, Board Member Coleman.
I'm just curious if you could answer, and again, this is Board Member Coleman, what was set aside this year to go ahead and bring the Student Services Center building up to what we needed? What was in the budget for that?
Mike Baker, COO. Madam Chair, we set aside $1.7 million in renovation out of operational to get that building up to our standards.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready. COO Baker.
You're on.
Arlene Manzanares, Executive Director of Finance. Before you will see the operational revenue comparison worksheet that I put together.
Mm-hmm.
the chart on the top, I just want to point out a few things. As in our monthly budget report, we talk about specific PED uniform chart of accounts. And so I've identified these here. These are the revenue account numbers, names, and towards the bottom is a description of each one of those. So as Jane scrolls down a little bit, you can reference each one of the object codes that are listed up on top.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Jane. You can go back to the top. So what I've listed here is the budget that we have currently for this year, 2019-2020, and our projected budget for next year. Of course, this is, as we've all talked, not the actual budget we're going to run on, but the I've been very conservative in projecting the other revenue sources, and it'll mainly be the state equalization that will change. So first of all, the ad valorem taxes, that is actually, that amount is projected to us and given to us by PED. Investment income, as we all know, state of the economy is very low, and so I've projected very low on our investment income. Our educational fees, and I've given a few examples of what fees those come from. So that would be from Secondary Learning Center, the Credit Recovery and Night School, and also our Montessori program. Summer school is our Secondary Learning Center and IHS summer school. The AYD Summer Academy, and that stands for Academic Youth Development Summer Academy, and the K-5 non-title student registration fee. Under rentals, this is mainly for our utility use rental income. As we've been closed, that revenue, we're expecting for it to be not as high as previous years, as we cannot rent those facilities out. Contributions is our payment in lieu of taxes, also known as pilot. And that is an actual projection. It is higher than what this year's is, but we're back on track and we've collected, so that would be, I wasn't conservative on that one. That's an actual amount. In the instructional categorical, we have in the past, for this year we did receive $11,000 from C&M for dual credit. I do not know if we're going to receive that again, so I did not project that. In our administrative categorical, our United Way donations are pretty consistent, so I continued with that. Any prior year expenditure refunds, I did not project any since we're pretty much shut down. Here again is our state equalization guarantee. So the 1920 is 145,824, and our projected 910B5, which we'll be going over next, is the 153,900. Indirect costs is for our federal grants, and that stayed the same, as well as sale of personal property and equipment. Madam Chair, if there's no questions, we can move on to the next report.
Finance, this is Finance Chair Noreen Scott. Are there any questions from the board, or shall we move on? I see no hands raised, so we'll move forward. Go ahead, Arlene.
Stick it in the,
Okay, so.
Are we ready to go on to Mike Chavez?
Madam Chair, the next sheet that I have to share is the 910B5, which is the breakout of the SEG. So the 910B5 is the membership average of the 80-120 day, this year's 80-120 day average. Okay, Jane, if you scroll down a little bit. There, stop, up, a little bit more. Right there, right there. So our total membership is 17,020, and last year's was 16,964. So it's just gone up just a bit, about 55.5. Then they break it into, scroll down a little bit further, Jane, please. Your kindergarten basic program, and then it identifies our T&E and TCI index, and you come up with your adjusted basic program units, which is 22,404. And last year's was 22,362. So as you can see, there's a pattern of it being very similar. You can scroll down a little bit more, Jane. Special education. The units for special education to include ancillary FTE units is 7,231.5. Last year's was 6,854.4. Elementary fine arts. The difference from this year and last year, the factor is the same. It's just according to the membership. Membership for last year was 8,896.50. So it was a little bit higher. You can go down a little bit more, Jane, please. A little too far. Oh. A little bit more. Oh, it keeps, okay. Bilingual program. Total units is 123. I'm sorry. Last year's was 123. This year's is the 119.75. Continue down. Then our national board certified teachers is the same as last year. Scroll down. And here's where the main majority of the changes is our at-risk units. So the at-risk index this year is 0.111 with our total membership of 17,020. Last year's At-risk index was 0.097 with our membership of 16,964.75. So the difference of our at-risk amount is about 1.5 million more this year compared to last year. As you scroll down a little bit more, we have some units for the charter school students and homeschool student activities, which stayed the same as last year, as this current year, sorry. And the homeschool program, let's see, units were 9. Last year was 1.9. And homeschool student program units was 4.2 last year. Our extended learning time program, they were able to, since this is a new program, they were able to get our 80 120-day average membership, which you'll see right there is 2,900. The factors stayed the same. So our extended learning time program units equal to about 1.5 million. And continue down. Right there. So you can see that our grand total units is 32,467.75. And last year's was 31,815.65. The unit value went up about 4% last year. Last year's was 4,565.41, and this year's unit value is 4,758.10. This is what Dr. Cleveland was referring to as the factors will stay the same, like the at-risk factor probably stay the same, but we'll get the hit will be in the unit value amount. Scroll down a little bit more. So a little bit too far. So right there, program cost is 154,484, and then you subtract out the tax levy of 761,071, which was that amount for the ad valorem tax that I told you PED figures out for us. And go on to the next page, Jane, giving us a grand total of our SEG of 153,914,031. Any questions?
Board Member Coleman, do you have any questions? Board Member Cullen, do you have any questions?
Yes, because these weren't in our board book, I'm having a really hard time seeing this. I'm sorry, this is Board Member Cullen. I'm really having a hard time seeing any of these documents because I'm running on 2 laptops. And so is this not in our, in our information as of yet within the 2021 file?
No. We will, Board Member Cullen, we will place these documents in the budget binder 2021.
Okay. All right. And Madam Chair, I asked that before we have a meeting that we make sure that we have documents available, especially doing this via online like this. It's extremely hard for me to be able to read these and be able to follow along. So if we could just make sure on that with the finance, thank you.
Board Member Cullen, my apologies completely. We recently got this 910B5. We were trying to get all of our documents together as quickly as possible for this meeting. Everything's been pretty rushed last minute because as we get the documents in from Ted.
Arlene, thank you very much. If you'll just get us the documents so that Board Member Cullen can study them and review them a little more clearly. I very much appreciate Board Member Cullen's expertise in this area and her thoughtful questions. So I appreciate anything you can do to help us have that. And thanks to your whole team for putting this together. We understand that everything right now is under duress. So thank you for your efforts.
This is Sue Cleveland, Superintendent. Yeah, so many of these things have literally been coming in within the last few days. So trying to get them all in and available has been a huge challenge. And so they worked diligently to try to get all of the information to you. And but we'll continue to try to do that. And my understanding, Mike, was everything was open, that we had opened the budget. Is that not the case?
Talk. Dr. Cleveland, this is Arlene Manzanares. You are correct, Dr. Cleveland. We have shared the budget, the 2021 budget binder with all board members. And in looking at it right now, the 910B5 for this year is available in the 2021 FY budget binder.
Main folder.
Okay. Thank you. I thought that it was. Again, though, we've all said it, but I just want to re-emphasize it again. These numbers are bogus. I mean, they're not at all going to be what we're getting, and they're not going to reflect correct amounts in any way. But as they reiterated this morning, particularly in the area of at-risk, they expect the indices to remain the same, or the unit value itself might drop. But they also said in other areas it could change, not just on a proportional basis, but actually there could be some changes to things being removed. And we don't know what those things are at this point in time. And some of those will definitely be driven by the negotiations that are going on right now between the LESC, LFC, and the governor's office. And so, it's still really good information to look at to see what's in there. But I do want to caution everyone, some things may not be there in the future. And we know absolutely for sure that the numbers are going to change.
Thank you, Dr. Cleveland. Shall we move forward, or do we have more questions?
It looks like we have a couple of hands raised. Person Scott, Board Member Coleman, and Cullen.
Okay, Board Member Coleman, go ahead.
Yes, this is Board Member Coleman. It looks like right before the meeting, things changed in Google Drive, and that what Arlene went over was added. My request is twofold. One, that we have enough time the next time to make sure that we can look at the documents that we're going to go over, because that would have been nice to look at ahead of time. In addition, if there are things that are loaded on short notice with the meeting coming up, if there's even any way that we could be notified that the file's updated, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Board Member Coleman. Board Member Cullen.
Yes, and this is Board Member Cullen, and I understand everything's kind of last minute, and I understand the budget. Dr. Cleveland is absolutely not going to be the budget that we're going to be looking at, but as you know, I can't see very well. So we all know that when trying to look on a screen, it becomes more difficult. So So I did see, and I just let you know, I do have access to the binder. I've been reviewing it. And I do have the revenue estimate worksheet, but it was those prior worksheets that she was going over beforehand that I can't find. And I'm not even sure if they're loaded in the book where they were loaded. So that was my thing is that, I'd like to review, Dr. Cleveland, I always review everything before meetings. So, and just because I always carry another computer so that I can be able to read the screen. So that's my only thing. And thank you. And I do appreciate everything that you guys are doing. And I know it's very last minute on some of these things, but it just makes it more, when you're talking, I can actually follow along. It's harder to follow along on these screens. So thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Cullen. Are there any more comments before we move forward?
Just the comment, we will really do our best to do that. And they, finance staff is trying really hard to do that. And things are just coming in, literally, some things are coming in the day before we meet. And so we're trying to put in the most recent, but we will strive really hard to do that. But there's just some times when the turnaround is unrealistic. And I think that's probably going to happen once we start seeing the changes that come out by the special session. But we will make just a valiant effort to try to get those to the board in time to review them. And, certainly the delays are, it's really kind of interesting because when we did spring budget workshop, we were saying exactly what you were saying to us. We were saying to the public ed department. It's very hard how quickly these things are changing. But I just assure you, we're going to try to do our very best to get those out to you as quickly as we can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we move on to Mike Chavez allocation? Have we lost?
I don't know. Let me check and see if Mike's still on. I think he is.
He's on mute.
He is on. He's on mute.
Okay.
There you go.
I was making sure Arlene was actually finished. I wasn't sure. Madam Chair, Dr. Cleveland, members of the board, good afternoon. These are certainly unique circumstances we're meeting under. Thank you all for your patience. I would like to share with you our current 2021 allocations, but I would like to begin by cautioning you, just as we've done with the budget, that these allocations were based upon prior information prior to what we currently have found out in the past couple of days. So just as with the budget, I would caution you that there's a very good chance that these may not be the same numbers that we are operating from going forward. So I'd like to review these very quickly, and then I will turn it over to Jenna Chenault and Renee Saucedo to give you some more in-depth, a more in-depth look at some of the specifics on the schools and where some of these additions or subtractions were made. So the first thing that I would say is that please keep in mind, as you know, we had some boundary changes this year. So some of these changes that you're going to see as we go down this sheet were due to changes with the schools in terms of their boundaries. Now, after all, the boundaries did not end up being quite as significant as we initially thought. And so the changes to many of the schools were rather small. Our overall membership numbers did not change significantly. We've been actually very flat for several years, as you are aware. The area of increase that we've seen this year has been in the secondary, and the elementary numbers have stayed pretty stagnant, if not decreasing just a little bit. So as we go down this sheet, this sheet is a broad overview that lets you see from each school. It gives you just a couple of things. It gives you a look at the teaching staff difference from this year to next year, and it gives you a difference of the EAs, and then an overall look at the operational numbers. So we thought that this would be a quicker way to take a look at each of the schools. And again, like I said, we can go through this, but I would look at it with a large grain of salt, because we don't know what's coming down the line, of course. So shining stars, and this is these numbers kind of go up and down between the schools. And I will tell you that in many cases, if you see additions to teaching staff, in a number of cases, these additions tend to be in the special education areas. Again, Jana and Renee can give you a little bit more specifics on those. So Shining Stars actually saw a small decrease. Cielo Azul is seeing an increase of about 4 teachers. Clinas del Norte is seeing a small decrease only in the EA area. They're flat in teaching. Enchanted Hills is seeing a small increase, 1 EA. Ernie Stapleton is seeing a decrease of an EA. So here's where we get the large increase here, of course. We're adding an entire school. So if we are to continue with the opening of Joe Harris will see an operating staff of about 43 or 44 staff members. And their teaching staff will be 24.5, their EAs will be 8. So we're going to get a bigger view of that in just a minute at the bottom of this sheet. And we'll talk a little bit about where some of those teachers are coming from and how many we're actually adding. Maggie Cordova, they're actually adding 1 special ed teacher, but overall they're actually losing about 4.5 staff members. And that has to do with an enrollment decrease because students are moving some students are moving to Joe Harris. However, I will tell you that approximately 80 parents chose to keep their students at Maggie Cordova and transport them based on their ability to transfer them up to May 27th or March 27th. So there were quite a number of parents who chose to keep their students at Maggie Cordova. So that changed, that decreased the enrollment at Joe Harris, and it increased the enrollment at Maggie Cordova over what we initially thought would happen. Martin Luther King, same thing. There were a few rising 5th graders that decided to stay, but not very many. So Martin Luther King altogether is going to lose about 11 staff members. Each of those schools, Maggie Cordova and Martin Luther King, will each lose around 5 teachers. Puesta del Sol, they're going up about 1/2 a teacher. Overall, they're going up 1.5. Rio Rancho Elementary is going down a little bit. Sandia Vista, they are they're staying pretty even. They're going up 1 teacher. And Vista Grande, they're going up a little bit. Looks like 3 teachers, but they're going down a couple of EAs. Eagle Ridge Middle School is going up teacher and a half. Lincoln Middle School, though, is going to have a decrease. Mountain View Middle School is going up a little bit. Their enrollment's going up a bit. Rio Rancho Middle is going up, and I believe that has to do with some new special ed programs. Cleveland actually had a a fairly large increase in their projected enrollment. So they'll be going up 4 teachers. Rio Rancho High School remained pretty even. They're only going up about 1 teacher. Cyber Academy will stay the same. Independence is going to go up a teacher. Desert Pathways is going to get a teacher. Secondary Learning Center will stay about the same. The SSC would gain 4 teachers. They would gain 11 employees altogether. So if we look at this all together, the district would gain a total staff of about 59 employees. 38 of those would be teachers, 38.9, so 39 teachers. Go ahead, Jane, go on down. So here's Joe Harris. So here's the way that Joe Harris would break out. They're going to have, they're projected to have 350 students. 11 of their teachers, 11 and a half of their teachers would come from 11.5 of their FTEs would come from Maggie Cordova and Martin Luther King. That means that we would still need to hire 8 teachers from outside of those teachers being transferred in. Overall, though, remember, he's going to need about 45 staff members. We already have 1. We have the principal. But on top of that, we would need a total of 45 staff members to staff that school. So remember, when Dr. Cleveland talks about and Mike talks about the operating cost, we always think about teachers, but the teachers only are making up less than half of the staff there. So we have, on top of that, we have quite a number of other staff that make up that school. So if you scroll down a little more, Jane. So here's the additional staff that you would need. You're talking about counselors, librarians, nurses, ed techs, bilingual, educational assistants, interventionists, SEALs, assistant principals, custodians, receptionists, attendants, secretaries, administrative assistants, security, and so you need 26.5 additional people on top of teachers to operate that school. So I'll stand for questions, and then I'll let Jenna and Renee jump in.
I think that this is Renee Saucedo, Secondary School Improvement. Mike, I think you covered all of the stuff that Jan and I were going to cover, so we can stand for questions too, unless Jana has anything to add. No, that's okay.
This is Jana Chenault, Elementary School Improvement Officer. Madam President, Dr. Cleveland, members of the board. Just a few things from elementary. Mike is correct. Our numbers have been relatively flat. We started the school year on August 13th with 7,534 elementary students. That does not include Shining Stars Preschool. And as of yesterday, we had 7,540. We've seen some parents disenroll due to the online learning, but not a large number, maybe about 10 students. So not a huge increase. We do always see an increase in preschool. The difference is Kim doesn't take any general ed preschoolers at a certain point. She's only really able to take the students that qualify for special education services. So she started the year at 577 and is currently at 680, with all of those being special education students that she's added. We are currently, so we're at 7,540. The current allocations that you're looking at for elementary are for 7,447 students. So we're shooting just a little bit lower than our current numbers. Principals are fully aware that, class mandated sizes for elementary. So kinder is 20. First through third grade is supposed to be 22. And fourth and fifth are 24. And I will say this year we staffed very closely to that, and teachers really were feeling relief for the first time since probably 2008. We really felt like we had a great handle on it. We were really excited about at-risk funding, thinking that we might get even more and be able to continue staffing. I know there was a lot of work in finance to make that happen last year. The reality hit, and everybody is fully aware that class sizes may not stay that low this coming school year. Renee and I have already had conversations about what that would look like at the school sites. I've already talked to some principals. They're kind of preparing in their minds some of those positions that might change or larger class sizes. So everybody's prepared. They're holding on and they realize that. As far as Joe Harris, Maggie, and MLK, the allocations you see there account for 280 of the Joe Harris students, but we're staffing for 315. We've been working really hard to try to figure out exactly how many students are going to be at Joe Harris. That's been very difficult with the transfer process and allowing parents to transfer students. So MLK has 23 student transfers for next year because we only accepted incoming fifth graders and students who were going to stay in fifth grade. So of those 23, only 7 fifth grade students are choosing to stay at MLK. And at Maggie Cordova, they have 159 transfers, and around 72 of those are to Joe Harris Elementary. They also have 6 district special ed programs. And so they have a lot of students that are on transfers for their special education needs. So when you look at Maggie's staffing, particularly special education or EAs, that number is going to be a lot higher than any other school because they have those 6 district programs. And they're actually adding a program this year, students from Shining Stars Preschool with autism. And so I think there's about 5 or 6 students that currently get a lot of support at Shining Stars that they're going to create a classroom for at Maggie. So that's why some of their numbers are a little higher in the special ed framework. I think those are really the big points for elementary this year. And Renee, I'll turn it over to you for secondary.
May I add something just real quick, Renee, before you, so that I don't forget what I was thinking? I want to piggyback on something that Jana said. This is the first year in probably over 10 years that we did not automatically staff for 10% over the state maximums. Doing that, we added well over 40 staff members last year automatically just to cover classrooms and make sure that we met the state maximum numbers. That was before we added any extra staff for special education programs or anything like that. So last year we added significant numbers to our staff roles. And so what you're seeing is, and we did the same thing this year, the numbers you are seeing right now, those numbers are allocated at state maximums. So every classroom in this district right now is allocated the way Ms. Chanel mentioned, and the same thing for secondary schools. We are not over state maximums anywhere. But that being said, as I've said from the very beginning, I think we need to hold our breaths and be prepared because the way that we used to survive as a district was to add a certain percentage to every state maximum, and teachers and principals knew that classrooms were going to be over those state maximums. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any questions before I move forward? Renee, were you going to add something?
Just a little bit on the secondary. Basically, the middle schools have stayed flat. Any fluctuation that you see is basically due to a difference in the ratio, general education and special education. Rio Rancho Middle School's increase was due to the cluster programs that are going to be coming in, the 5th graders coming up to 6th grade. Then at the high school level, cyber stayed the same. Independence, we've added an extra special education teacher so that we can bring in more students who are on an IEP into Independence. Rio Rancho and Cleveland, Mike spoke to the increase in Cleveland. Rio Rancho looks like it went down, but in actuality, if you look at the second column, which is the 1920 actual staff, sometimes when, especially at the high school level, staff's added FTE are added late, it's very difficult to put that into a master schedule. And so you can see they were originally approved for 227 staff members, but they only scheduled 213. They only hired that many. So we were actually able to use that difference in some of the other schools last year. So they will feel like they've gone up. They're going to feel like they have additional staff members, even though it looks like they've gone down 0.14. And I believe that that's all I have if there's any questions.
Thank you, Renee. We'll start with Board Member Coleman. Do you have any questions? Board Member Cullen, do you have any questions?
Sorry about that, but I'm good.
Okay.
This is Board Member Cullen. Renee, are you seeing very many, even just a few, disenroll right now, unenroll in high school or middle school due to the online learning?
I have not seen that, and I've been talking to principals, and they haven't mentioned anything like that. If anything, I've been working very closely with the senior offices, trying to make sure, as we're having a hard time contacting some of the kids. But they might be the same students that we would have had a hard time with if we were in the buildings. But I haven't heard anything about people disenrolling at this point. I can I'll ask that specific question.
Yeah, because I did get a call from a parent. I won't go into it, but I did forward it on over to the district office with some concerns. So I just didn't know if we're getting many of those or not. So, okay, thank you.
Board President Galbraith.
I do not have any questions.
Board Vice President Jeffrey Morgan. I have no questions, so we will move on then.
I'm sorry, but I do need to make a couple of comments here real quickly. No, that's okay. I sure don't want to lose. There are a couple things that you should be aware of. Again, I even hesitate to didn't even know whether we should show this, because I really want you to know this isn't what it's going to look like at all when we're done. So I think that's important to know. Second, this morning there was discussion of reinstituting the waivers. That's not good news. It's taken us 10 years to get here, to get everybody back under the state requirements, but they are looking the possibility of waivers again. I think in terms of Board Member Cullen, your comment about disenrolling, I think people this year are kind of pretty much giving us a pass. I don't think that's going to be the case next year. So I do think that we're going to have to offer some online options in order to keep some of the folks registered with our district. And while we have not seen it, other districts in New Mexico have definitely seen their enrollment dropping. And I don't think, just to be really honest, they've done as good a job as the Rio Rancho staff has done in terms of providing for during this interim time, but they are seeing it. And then my last comment on that is, we do stand perhaps to lose some students if we don't step up and offer some options that maybe we've not offered before, but those will cost some money. And then in terms of the one that was a shocker for me, maybe more than anything else this morning, was they are reconsidering early childhood. And that has been the number one push for the governor, and that has been the number one, can we afford any expansions in it? There was some discussion this morning about pulling all children out of early childhood, that we do not have to pay for in terms of special ed, and eliminating the grant funding for the others. So those are really hard discussions, and that's not necessarily what's going to happen. So I want to be sure, but to be really honest, I never thought we would be discussing the cut of early childhood, given where we've been and the evidence of the support for it in the legislature, the support for the governor and all of that. But it was mentioned this morning, we may not be able to support the growth of it in the short term. There are some legislators who are discussing whether we can afford the new department, which is quite expensive to run another department. And so, there will be a lot of changes. So as we look at this, Mike Chavez has shared that. As we look at this, I just want to caution you, it's not going to look this way. It's just not, it can't, given the projected cuts. And so, for example, at Shining Stars, we've been moving away from the role model for years. And there are very few kids that get in anymore that really qualify. Most all of our children have needs. They may not be special ed, but they may be pretty close to that. There may not even be funding for those kids in the future to be able to access those services. I don't know. I mean, the only point I'm trying to make is that everything's on the table right now. And we're going to see some significant cuts. And these things are not going to look like this. And so I really almost feel bad about taking your time and going through them, because I know that that's not what this is going to look like in a relatively short period of time. But this is what we had hoped we would have, and this is what we think we really need. And sometimes we get asked that question, what is it that you really need? I think this is a really good document to show what we believe we really need. But it's not what it's going to look like for next school year at all.
This is Finance Chair Scott. Dr. Cleveland, I think this has been very instructive for us new board members who are looking at going through this budget for the first time. So even if it's not what it's going to be, I found it very helpful to be able to go through these documents and to begin to understand. And I by no means want to sound like I understand it, because I don't, but I'm getting closer to understand it as we work through it. So I thank you all, the whole team, for that. And if we could, for the sake of time, move on now to salaries and benefits.
Thank you all for your time.
Chairperson Scott, I have a question. This is Wynn Coleman, board member.
No worries.
Will we get that document that was just reviewed? Will that be in Google Drive?
Just review the allocation.
Say that again, Wynn.
The allocation sheets.
Yes, I'm looking, and I've been through things, but I just don't know if I see kind of that breakdown with the.
We will, if it's not there now, we will load that in the budget binder.
Okay, thank you. And then I know that board member Cullen had a question too.
I'm sorry, I can't see either of you on my screen. So I can't see when you just raise your hand. You have to speak up like you did, and thank you.
Okay, this is board member Cullen, and yeah, we do have on our system, Noreen, just to let you know, we have the capability of raising the hands electronically so that the person who's running the meeting can see who wants to have a question. But real quick, Dr. Cleveland, I know we had discussed this a little bit this week when we had a conversation in reference to the enrollment and how that might play next year. And I know that I'd like to move on with the meeting. Obviously, we got a couple other presentations, but because you had mentioned it, is Carl working on kind of what we talked about with the Edgenuity online, and as well as kind of expanding the cyber, but outside of cyber?
Carla, if you're on, if you respond to that, yes, we have talked about how we might go about that. Carla, are you on?
Yes, Dr. Cleveland, this is Carl Leppelman, Chief Academic Officer. Yes, we spoke about it at Cabinet was a Thursday, and I do have been in conversation with Trent Keim with Edgenuity. We need to set up a virtual meeting with Renee and Heidi to look at how many seats we might need to expand and what that cost would be based on offering actually an expanded cyber. It wouldn't be exactly like the cyber. Basically, in the cyber blended model, as you know, students come in twice a week as high school, for example, students, and they have time face-to-face with the teacher. In this case, it would be Edgenuity platform with 2 to 3 times a week where the parent would actually have Google Classroom with that teacher. So we'd use that same platform, that classroom, but use Edgenuity as the actual instructional core curriculum. And what we're suggesting is, as we build the high school schedule, for example, we build Algebra 1, for example, courses that are blended within the schedule. So it would require working with the schedulers at the high school as well as the high school staff. And that would be the same model we would use at middle school that we do at that cyber site.
Okay, yeah, just because I'm just worried about the enrollment numbers. I guess maybe I worry about everything, but but maybe next year for the numbers that we're looking at, if we're going to be starting to see a shift since these kids have started online schooling now. And if our allocations, I mean, with those allocations, it kind of brings up, are we going to start seeing some students move from being in a traditional classroom and wanting to go online? They've experienced this for a month and a half.
Well, these are good
But
questions.
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Chairman.
I think there's going to be some fear, obviously, of going traditional and going back and being in a school. But I do think that if you look at it, we can. I have been in conversation with the staff at the cyber. They are currently doing that model, and it's different for them. But I do think that we'll have parents that would probably want to. And by the way, in terms of membership, they just need to be enrolled at least 3 out of 6 periods or 4 out of 7, depending on the schedule.
Carl, do you want to address a little bit about, there's really kind of 2 options too in terms of secondary. If we got enough students, then we could look at a model, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, we could look at a model almost like cyber. If we don't have a lot of students, we would end up having to, rather than have teachers full-time committed to being blended teachers, might just pick it up for 1 or 2 periods. And so it would seem to me that that's going to depend on how many people actually want that option. But if it's a significant number, we would move pretty much to the model of cyber. If it was a limited number, then the teacher might only have that 1 or 2 periods a day. Is that correct?
Yes, you could build that. And Dr. Cleveland, you had mentioned during our meeting, we're going to need to survey and determine. There are so many unknowns. I mean, when do we start school? And obviously, to be healthy and normal is get back to school and open school. But there are a lot of steps that have to take before we get there. But I do think, yes, I think a teacher could be both. It requires some professional development. And actually, Heidi, we have a person, we can do most of that internally with our existing staff. But a teacher could do both.
One of the challenges will be when you sign up for it, you're going to have to stay with it, at least for a semester. But we're not, once we dedicate staff to that, we're not going to be able to just pull kids back in when it doesn't work in a week or 2. So it's that's one of the challenges is we bring people into cyber. There is a pretty extensive process in which there's training of the student and the parent and whatever. And so we would need to do that same level of training with parents and with students. But what I don't think people may understand is you're just not going to be able to float from one to the other whenever it's convenient. because we may not have the staffing that would allow us to do that. So probably tied to a commitment for a semester, and then we might be able to make an adjustment. But the folks who go to cyber generally have really researched it, and they've really made a commitment to go there. We may get some folks who really don't quite know what the responsibilities are and why it does look very different in terms of your responsibilities as a student and a parent. But that being said, colleges and universities are all moving that way right now. We're hearing UNM might be totally virtual in the fall. So it is giving students an opportunity, certainly, to learn a different way of learning that they're definitely going to look at if they're going on to college, university. But there's a lot of unknowns. There's just a lot of things we would have to think about.
Okay, are we ready to move on? To salaries and benefits expenses?
All right.
You're good.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Cleveland. This is Heather Gabaldon, Director of Finance, and I am just going to give you a quick overview of how we spend our operational salaries and benefits money. So it's pretty self-explanatory. I'll go through it really fast. We'll start at the biggest chunk, which is teachers. 62% is spent on teachers. Custodial, that's all of our custodians and custodian foremans at the schools and district office, 3%. Maintenance is 2%, and that's basically everybody who does the care and upkeep of the grounds, maintenance of buildings, and upkeep of equipment. Educational assistance is 6%. District office administration and staff is 8%, and that covers finance department, human resources department, the IT department, the superintendent's department, the chief operating, chief academic, chief school improvement, and chief communication strategy and engagement officers, the RADA department, the legal department, the federal programs, and then the administration of the following departments: athletics, special services, student services, security, facilities, fine arts, and C&I. And then school administration and support staff is 7%, and that covers principals, assistant principals, administrative assistants at the schools, bookkeepers, registrars, and attendance clerks. And then 1% is the librarians and the library aides. 5% is guidance counselors and social workers. 1% are our security guards at the schools. And then 5% is ancillary services, and that covers diags, speech therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, psychologists, audiologists, and interpreters. Now, this is just operational money. So keep in mind that we also have several federal funds that fund a large portion of our salaries as well. We have, we have Title I that pays the salaries of 54 general ed teachers at title schools for around $2 million. We have IDEA B, which pays the salaries of 60 special ed teachers and 17 special ed teachers for about $2.6 million. We have Medicaid, our Medicaid fund, that pays the salaries and benefits of all nurses and health EAs for $1.7 million. We have a separate transportation fund that pays all the salaries and benefits related to that department at $2.5 million. And we have a pre-K grant that pays all the salaries and benefits of 17 EAs and 14.5 preschool teachers for $1.4 million. And we have other smaller funds that also pay salaries and benefits, but those are the biggest. Any questions?
Do I hear any questions from any of the board? Hearing none. Seeing none, Dr. Cleveland, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't.
Okay, then we'll move on to department expenses.
Okay, Madam Chair, Dr. Cleveland, board members, just want to go over this expenditure form fairly briefly because we will be meeting May 11th to review the detail on the expenditures. And hopefully this will give you some time to actually look at the expenditures and look at each department. So for this afternoon, I just want to briefly go over this particular form. This form is in your budget binder. It is listed as budget history operational. And it is segregated by cabinet members. So the beginning of the form starts with the superintendent, and a number of the departments under the superintendent's office include student services, fine arts, athletics, and RADA. And there are also subgroups within the superintendent's department as well. You can see that it appears that there's a pretty significant increase of 38% in the superintendent's budget. However, that is because we segregated the FAEA budget into that particular department. The next cabinet is Chief Academic Officer, which largely includes special services, C&I, federal programs, and school improvement officers. There is an approximate 10% increase in that department, largely due to some new programs. Number 3, the communications department is essentially, there's really no significant increase in that department. The next department is the Chief Operations Officer, myself. Those particular departments include facilities, finance, human resources, IT, safety and security, and transportation. Again, you'll see a 25% increase in that department. However, those increases are for 2 reasons. One, IT, I told you earlier that we moved the software from a special fund into operational. And secondly, we increased projects in the facilities department that we will very likely decrease when we submit, for the lack of a better term, the real budget in the months to follow. The next department, there is no actual department head, but it's the fiduciary department, which largely houses our cash. That department is essentially status quo. A new department, Office of Legal Counsel, again, is a new department. We don't have last year's expenditures to compare. And then our school sites budgets are the each individual school. We have an increase there because of the new school site locations. So that is a brief summary of our expenditures. And as I said earlier, May 11th, we will go into more detail on the expenditure side of the budget. We will also, at that time, be asking the school board to actually approve the balanced budget so we can submit it to PED. Also on May 11th, we will go over some ideas on what we plan on cutting depending on what the state comes back and requests the cuts from us. So that's our plan for May 11th. And at this time, I stand for questions.
Board Member Coleman. Do you have any questions? This is Chair Scott. Board Member Coleman.
Yes, this is sometimes hard to kind of grasp that microphone. Board Member Coleman. Mike, I wanted to know when you come back May 11th, there are, in going through the documents that are on Google Drive, there were questions that I had now, and I understand that a lot of that will change. But can you explain or could give calendar as far as we will be able to really kind of ask some of the questions, and when I just want to make sure that we get the chance to contribute to areas that we might have questions about or changes to the budget, and when it's due. Can you just kind of give an overview of that real quickly?
Did you get it?
Did you hear me?
Madam Chair, Dr. Cleveland, board members. So I'm not sure, you kind of breaking up, and there seems to be kind of a lag there, but the budget is due to the state May 13th, this particular budget. And as we said, as Dr. Cleveland said earlier, this almost really is an exercise in futility because this will not be our final budget. And so it is my anticipation that we will be coming to the Finance Committee and the school board with probably some pretty significant reductions in what's going to be, for the lack of a better term, the real budget. And on May 11th, we will provide some of our ideas on what those reductions would be. In regard to questions between now and then, if you submit, and we've had some questions that have been submitted through Tracy's office, please submit those questions and we will get those to you as soon as we possibly can. I know we did answer some today, so there's likely kind of a delay in there, but I think this point moving forward, since we do have a balanced budget, that we could expedite those questions in the future.
Is it worth asking questions now with what's on the drive, knowing that they're going to change? I'm just wondering when a more realistic view of our budget or of is going to be shared with us.
This is Sue Cleveland. I'm sorry, I stepped away for a moment. I had to take an important call. We don't know that information, Board Member Coleman. We don't know when we're going to get any direction from the state in terms of how much we need to cut. But we've been told today, start now looking at your budget and looking at where you can make significant cuts. And so we'll begin the process to look at that. And certainly we will share that. When we get any information in terms of how much that reduction will be, and we will share that immediately with the board. But right now we don't know that. And I don't think they know that. And they're trying very hard to get a handle on how much, as I said, there's two numbers. One is what they will cut the state budget by, and then the other is out of that, what percentage will they cut education by? And the secretary assured us this morning that they were going to try very hard not to have education share the same percentage cut as the total state budget. But they were not able to give us any indication this morning on how much that's going to be. Right now, there are, according to two of our delegation, I said there are conversations going on right now between the governor and the key leaders in terms of the New Mexico legislature. Those are secret meetings, And they are trying to come to some kind of a consensus about what the number is that we need to cut. But we asked this morning several times, you have any idea in what percentage should we be looking at? And we were told very clearly, no, we don't yet. And as soon as we know, we will let you know, but be thinking about cuts. And one of the things that is really critical about it all is the raises. And you have two very strong opinions on that. And one is to take the whole 4% back. And those that are arguing for that say it's hard to give employees a raise when there's so many people out of work. The other is, yes, but we don't want school employees who waited for years to see their paychecks go down. And so that's one of the items, I think, until they get resolved, it's going to be very hard to determine what percentage of a cut we're going to have. But there's absolutely no disagreement at all that significant cuts are coming to our budget.
Right, and so Dr. Cleveland, I don't know if you heard my my full question. What I was just wondering is, at what point do we submit our questions based on changes that are going to occur? I know you don't know when, but I don't want to post questions on what's on Google Drive right now if those are not going to be worth doing.
Yeah, and you make a really good point, and I surely wish I could answer your question better than I'm able to do right now. But I would say this: I don't think we're going to. I think we can just absolutely guarantee there'll be no program enhancements. We'll be very lucky. Well, what we'll be looking at is how we hang on to the things that are most important to us. One of the things that we agreed with the secretary this morning was by early next week, we will submit to him from all the districts across the state our top priorities and funding. And then they will try to begin to share that with these committees that are working on the budget now, because they want to know what is the most important thing we want to preserve. And so is it salaries? Is it program? Is it, what are the most important things that we want to save? And so we're working in the dark. I mean, that's all I can tell you. We're working in the dark, but I think the one thing that, number one, we try to save every penny we can. And number two, I think we know there will not be program enhancements to the budget unless there were significant cuts somewhere else. And I don't know what the timeline for that will be. One of the things we asked the secretary this morning, sooner is better than later. And every week, every month we wait, it's harder and harder to make the changes that we need to make.
Madam Chair, Dr. Cleveland, board members, to answer a previous question, I think as you go through this budget, even though it's going to change, we're not exactly sure what will change or how much is going to change. So if you do have questions, please post your questions. Let's get them answered, because I think what is likely to occur is that once we do get the final orders from Santa Fe, we are going to have to move very, very quickly. So if we can answer those questions now, knowing with the caveat that things are going to change, even though things are going to change, most things are going to stay the same, I think. So whatever questions you have, please submit them. We will answer them. If we believe that there's a potential for that particular question to change, we will give you that indication. And I hope I answered that question.
You did. Again, this is Board Member Coleman. The other thing too that we just need to make sure, those questions that are on the drive, everybody can see everybody's. And so I know that we had talked about that being, yeah. So if you can check on that, even if you pull it down, for example, like right now.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but yes, I'll pull it down as soon as we're done.
Yeah, so, okay, thank you.
All right,
and I just want to say, thank you to everybody. I can't imagine what this is like for all of you having to do, but I appreciate the diligence and the time.
Are there any further questions?
Is there in 2020?
Before we,
This is Board Member Cullen. Sorry, before you headed off, I just wanted to say, yeah, that since you guys are new to this budget review, the new board members, they do have a place for questions as you're reviewing, and Tracy's really great at responding. I mean, some of them were just general information, just because our process has changed significantly the last couple of years. And so it's still evolving every year, and I appreciate it, but sometimes there might be something that's new that I wasn't quite sure about, so I'll email them. So as you're going through it, even though the budget's going to be changing, it's to kind of understand the budget process and what they're doing through it. So yeah. I encourage you to use that so you can ask some questions.
I appreciate that, Board Member Cullen. Are there any further questions from anybody on this? Dr. Cleveland, do you have any comments?
No, except just to say welcome to the budget world of the New Mexico financial dilemma, because it is going to be a very challenging time, but we'll get through it. We always have, but it's going to be very hard. Because as we went through the Great Recession, we did have the stimulus money that came in to help offset it. I'm not sure we're going to get much of that this time. So, but we'll work through it, and we will keep you informed as quickly as we get the information. We're very eager to get that information.
Thank you, Dr. Cleveland. CO Mike Baker, the advanced planning, is our next meeting going to be on May 25th? Or did I understand you to say it would be sooner than that for the Finance Committee meeting?
Mike Baker, COO, Madam Chair, Dr. Cleveland, school board members. The next Finance Committee meeting will be May 11th. I believe that coincides with a board meeting. And then at that time, May 11th, we'll also go from Finance Committee at some time into the school board meeting, requesting approval of the balanced budget. And then sometime after that date, yet to be determined, we will come back to the Finance Committee and review in much more detail the recommended reductions to the balanced budget.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Appreciate that. Any comments?
If I may, this is Board Member Coleman. I would just like to throw out there that having only 1 hour on May 11th to tackle this, it is concerning that we really have the time that we need to go ahead and handle this. So if we could give some consideration to providing more time for us to have these discussions for the budget on the 11th, or even before that, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Board Member.
COO, Madam Chair, Dr. Cleveland, school board members. Yes, we will schedule some additional time for that meeting.
Thank you. We'll expect Jane to kind of update it. Okay. Is there any other comments before we adjourn? Anyone? Okay. Then I will adjourn the meeting.